Welcome back, everyone. I just wanted to make this video really quick because some heavy shit went down in the comments section of the live stream. Now, the title of this video should be something about fallacies afoot. And there were fallacies that I pointed out. Now, I would like to come out and say that when I am pointing out these fallacies, this is not a direct attack to anyone. My goal is not to go around picking fights. My goal is to analyze philosophies with this particular thing. I suppose sometimes I do get into fights, but it's not deliberate. I'm not going out of my way to piss people off. Some people, you just can't help it, like the whole SJW narrative. I mean, they get pretty fucking offended pretty easily, pretty quick over the smallest minute things. Aside from that, alright, first of all, I would like to say that as far as the Martin Luther King Jr. statement was concerned, I sided with Punks for Progress because I thought he was a leftist. Gothic Republican, Lothier, was saying that he was Republican. Actually, it turns out that it might be more... I don't know that any of us were correct, and it might be that Punks for Progress was probably more correct than any of us. So I dug out some information, and here's a screenshot from a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself. And it says, and I quote, "I don't think the Republican Party is a party full of the Almighty God, nor is the Democratic Party. They both have weaknesses, and I'm not incredibly bound to either party." Then I got curious as where he would fall on the political spectrum, because Democrat and Republican aren't necessarily indicative of where you would fall on the political spectrum. So then I found this. And some people may doubt the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is where the quote came from, and some people may doubt the media vendor Quora, but on the fly, this is what I'm coming up with. I will be releasing another video about the live stream where I go into detail about the philosophy that Punks for Progress laid down. I'm not going to give any more information other than that. You're just going to have to wait for the video, which is going to have to take place when I have a day off. But in this particular subscription, I would like to find a political compass scale with like the 4 quadrants where it actually shows where he would land, but on the fly, this is what I found. Is that Martin Luther King Jr. would best be described as a democratic socialist and a pacifist. Both ideologies had their foundation in his Christian faith. So I think everyone was kind of wrong on that, and I think Punks for Progress was probably closest. And now I'm going to get to the main part of this, the most important part of this hopefully very short video, and that is the information that was doxed about Reverend Aaron, as he calls himself, the guy from Punks for Progress. Listen, naturally, I do not advocate for somebody who rapes someone. It doesn't matter what gender you are to me. If you have raped someone, that is probably a guilt that you should carry with you for the rest of your life, that you should always be remorseful of and feel bad about it forever, for the rest of your days. Live in guilt over what you have done. And that is my personal belief on it. And I think that you are a horrible human being if you have raped someone and you have by no counts looked back in your life and regret. However, This does not discredit the things that he was saying about anarchical socialism. There are other things that can do that, and that's called philosophy. This is a character assassination and essentially an ad hominem fallacy. You cannot reject everything that he said as being fallacious because he has committed an atrocity. I will give a great example. Many people of the ultra-extreme left like to discredit people who are liberals, like myself, quoting Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by bringing up the fact that he was a spousal abuser. He abused his spouse. This does not discredit Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy and the idea that he was perpetuating. Nobody is a perfect human being. Not a single one of us out there is a perfect human being. Now, granted, some of us have engaged in levels of nefarious behavior that I would say go to greater lengths than others. For instance, if you were to try and find my personal profile, the worst you would ever find is a charge for possession of marijuana. Seriously, that's all you're going to find. So, that being said, it's not an action that I condone, but I'm not going to discredit the argument itself, and I'm not going to take away from the opportunity to learn about this particular side of political philosophy just because he's done something a long time ago. All the articles that I read were about something that he did when he was 19 years old. Some people have come forward and said that people are still coming forward about accusations against him, but every single thing that I could find suggests that he has been through the court system, and this has been handled by the judicial system as it should be. So when did we resort to tribe mentality, crucibles, and witch trials? I thought this sector of the internet, being the skeptic side of the internet, was supposed to be above that kind of groupthink. Again, I have to reiterate, this is not an action I condone, but I am interested in finding the philosophy, and there is nothing I can do about something that somebody did 20 years ago. There is nothing we can do about it now. He has served his time, he has been through the justice system, he has been to court, he has been through the judicial system, and they have dealt with it. And that is the proper approach to it, and I have no ill with that. I think that that is the proper way that it needs to be dealt with, not by a screaming herd mentality, yelling and screaming. Let the court system deal with it as a democracy is supposed to do. Granted that democracy is functioning to its full potential in the way that it's supposed to, which, because of crony capitalism, it does not always, and I think we all know that. Jussie Smollett just got out. It's not because of black privilege, it's because of rich and famous privilege. Let's be honest. That's what it is. It's when you are rich and you are famous, you have notoriety, you get away with shit. That's the way it goes. It's not how it should go, but that is what we are seeing. So no, I'm not going to resort to a herd mentality and try and shish kebab him on an open fire because of something he did a long time ago, or something that the courts are pursuing currently if people are coming out and pursuing that he has indeed raped someone. Those are the charges for the court to deal with, not me. I am not judge, jury, and executioner over a person. But I do think if he is guilty of that, then it's something that he should remind himself every morning when he wakes up in the mirror of something he should feel guilty about. You do not rape people. That is inappropriate, it is foul, and it is detestable and despicable on every single level. I cannot rationalize rape. I cannot. However, there are some other fallacies that I can talk about that can be illustrated, and like I said, this is not meant as an attack. I am not trying to pick a fight. This is just, it is what it is. First of all, I happen to notice that one of his core principal arguments, and I noticed it in other videos as well, is that he will bring up the concept, he will ask the question, I bet you cannot name a socialist or anarcho-socialist Marxist philosopher other than Karl Marx, and he mentioned another prominent name that has written literature about socialism and Marxism and anarcho-socialism as well. And this is a fallacy. This is kind of an appeal to ignorance type thing. Just because somebody has not read a collection of works does not mean that they do not understand a particular political philosophy. That is fallacious. That is ridiculous to even suggest that. Just because I haven't read a book by these several different authors that have a very specific and biased take on what is socialism and anarcho-socialism doesn't mean that I don't understand the concept of socialism itself. The whole point of me asking the questions that I did during that live stream was that I wanted to get his framework of how he defined it personally. Because people tend to do that. They tend to define political things in their own way. I think even to some degree I do. If I take a political compass test, it'll score me as an independent liberal. Actually, ironically, he put me in that category. He kind of compared me, well, I don't know that he compared me to FDR, but I think it's interesting that the way he was talking about FDR, talking about restrictions and regulations on capitalism, is not really on his side, but it's not really against what he's going for, and that would be what you call a liberal, and that tends to be where I stand, is I want restrictions on capitalism because of major corporations using capitalism and corruption to their advantage to take advantage of the weak, basically the working class, the individual. And to me that's a problem because they're breaking laws that have real victims attached to the laws that they're breaking. If you want an example of this, look up Aaron Brockovich. I'm not making an appeal to ignorance with that. I'm just saying if you want more information on what that looks like, look up Aaron Brockovich. There's also many other documentaries out there outlining exactly what I'm talking about as well, like the documentary series called Rotten. That one is actually available on Netflix, and it's pretty unbiased too, might I add. And I was really proud of Netflix for having a documentary that was that unbiased. It does lean, okay, maybe it's not completely unbiased, it does lean closer to the left, but they do bring up things that conservatives bring up as a point of interest as well. So it's not completely biased, believe it or not. Check it out, decide for yourself. Don't let me think for you. That is one thing that I adamantly encourage everyone, is to think for themselves. Don't let me think for you. I've pointed you in the right direction. You can go and watch it, and you can come back, and you can say, I disagree, and here's why. You don't have to pick a fight. I'm not advocating for picking a fight. Philosophy literally means the art of debate. So another fallacy that, actually, before I go on to any other fallacies, it was brought up to Lothier. He said he was a constitutionalist. And I am not defending Punks for Progress because he's Punks for Progress. I'm defending this because he's fucking right. Alright? Lothier claims to be a constitutionalist. Yet when he is asked what, I think it was the 14th or 13th Amendment was, he couldn't recite it. He doesn't know enough about the amendments or the Constitution to recite it verbatim and know what these weird... I personally don't know. I don't know. I know the Constitution says we the people, for the people, by the people. I know that certain elements of the Constitution, I don't walk around calling myself a constitutionalist. But that was not an appeal to ignorance, and here's why. Because let's say that I proclaim to be a big fan of Edgar Allan Poe, and someone asks me, well, have you read it, or do you know any of his poems? And my answer was no. And then they asked, have you read any of his works? And my answer was no. That's a valid argument to make, to say, well, then you're not an Edgar Allan Poe fan. If you don't know any of his works, if you've never read any of his works, how can you proclaim to be a fan of Edgar Allan Poe? It's a legitimate argument, I'm sorry to say. I'm not trying to spit on Lothier. He made some valid points too, but got over-talked multiple times, as I'm sure everyone watching was well aware. I'm not trying to take sides in this. I'm just simply pointing out what is factual and what is not. But it is a fallacy to try and say that just because you haven't read this collection of works, that must automatically mean you have no conceptualization of a complete philosophy, or not a complete philosophy, but the understanding of a political philosophy, just because you haven't read some works. But it also, at the same time, if you're going to say that you are a fan of something, but you don't understand that particular thing, then it's hard to say that you're really a fan of that thing, isn't it? So that was one fallacy that I wanted to point out. I'd also like to point out that it is fallacious. It is an ad hominem attack. You are committing a character assassination by doxing him and then trying to use that information against him to discredit everything he's said. Now, when it comes to the rape thing, I would go back and say, okay, when Nancy Pelosi was called a bitch, I think when you have a record like that under your belt, you have no right to speak on behalf of political correctness. I am not a fan of political correctness, and political correctness is a debate all in its own by itself, aside from anarcho-socialism versus capitalism. Completely different argument to be made. But I find it really hard for a person to try and make a political correctness argument against calling a female a bitch when you've literally done one of the more horrible things you could possibly do to a woman. You have no room to talk. That's my personal opinion. That is not a philosophy. That's just my personal opinion. But ultimately, when it gets down to the philosophy of political correctness, I think political correctness is an uphill battle. And if people continue on the curve of political correctness and giving words power that they don't deserve, giving them the ability to squash a person's ego and make them feel small with just a mere utterance of a word, I think we're giving those words way too much power. Way too much power. And the thing about political correctness, due to colloquialism and due to slang, and because the English language evolves and changes with time, that not only do the words of what we consider to be politically incorrect change, but we're not getting rid of words that have been added. The list just keeps growing. Maybe it's time the list starts to shrink. So, I'm not going to give a dichotomy of that. If you want a dichotomy of that, The Amazing Atheist has a recent upload that you can go and watch about George Carlin, where he talks about it. Just know that I am of the same philosophy. I am against political correctness. And I also think it's insulting to minorities, such as myself as a homosexual, to insinuate that I don't know the difference between somebody using the word faggot, let's say, in the sense of being frustrated. Playing video games, you hear that word uttered a lot against somebody that they've lost against. I know that they are not being bigoted in that sense. I have enough wit to myself to be able to discern the difference between somebody who is frustrated and somebody who is homophobic. Also, I know how to tell the difference when somebody is reframing that word to a different group of people that they don't like, such as annoying Harley Davidson writers. That point was made evident and clear in an episode of South Park. And to insinuate that a person like me cannot differentiate the difference between a colloquial use of a pejorative or just straight up being homophobic, well, that's insulting to my intelligence. I know the difference. And I know plenty of women that are self-subscribed bitches, and they are proud of it because it is a sign of female empowerment. And that's really my take on it, and that's where political correctness really starts to break down. That's for a different debate. I had another question that went unanswered, and because of all the uproar that has been brought, I am not able to ask that question on a live stream now. But that question would have been, I would like to know what he thinks of the Silicon Valley corporate giants and their push towards censorship of content creators and people on Twitter and Facebook that they don't appreciate or care for. I can surmise what the answer will be, but that would be philosophically incorrect of me because I would be making an assumption. This is a question only he can answer, and him alone. Now, lastly, I'd like to talk about doxing. Doxing is not something I am in favor of. I will not participate in doxing. I do not condone or endorse doxing. The person who did this came out originally saying his entire name, saying where you would find any information on this particular case, and then more people clamored in the comment section to leave links to the proclamation. This is doxing. I understand that you felt that it was important information for people to know, but I think that there could have been a better route to do it, possibly. And I suppose it's relevant information. I guess it's relevant information when you're talking about politically correct policing, tongue policing someone for calling a female a bitch. I suppose it's relevant in that scenario. But as far as explaining anarcho-socialism from his perspective and how he understands it from the various books and writers that he's read about it from, this is irrelevant information and something that happened a long time ago. It's a character assassination. It's muckraking. And yes, I disavow the action of rape. It's not anything I stand behind. But what do you want him to do about it now? I'll leave you with that question. He could come and publicly apologize, which I'm sure he's done many times, but it's not going to change your eye view at this point, is it? I am not defending anyone in this scenario, in this case. I am not defending Punks for Progress, I am not defending Lothier, and I am not defending the people who doxed. Just keep that in mind. I'm just trying to make you aware of the situation that has happened. As someone commented to me, you spent 2 hours debating with somebody who raped someone, as if that discredits their entire philosophy. Rest assured, I am going to analyze the philosophy that has been presented to me about anarcho-socialism, and I will do it in a way in which I am not picking a fight. But there are some quandaries that I have at looking at a 4-quadrant political spectrum and some other questions that I think you all will find very interesting when I plug it into the 4-quadrant political spectrum, as well as some other political spectrums that have been written out by the awesome Polish kid. So I will leave you with that. I'm sure I'm going to get some hateful comments in the comments section below, but whatever. I don't know how I can reiterate over and over again. To me, your body is one of the most surefire things that you have dominion over in this life. And it was said in a gothic rock band, the Skeletal Family, goth punk, they had an interesting quote that said, "Your life is not your own, it can be taken from you." So if we are to follow that philosophy, that train of thought, because that is a true statement, it can be taken from you. If we're to follow that, then I would say that, well, let me outline my philosophy, a very basic, I cut my philosophy down into short words that basically sums the frame of the entirety of my philosophy. I believe in choices, not one's ability to impose one's will on others against their own will. This is a philosophy I've recited many, many, many times. So from my perspective, something like rape, murder, abuse, molestation, these are the biggest infringements upon an individual's rights, liberties, and freedoms. That's the biggest infringement upon those things that you could possibly make on an individual. If you have no dominion over what you do with your your say, if you have no dominion in say what happens to your body, then that's really fucked up. Out of anything in this world, that is the one thing that you should have absolute dominion over, is your own body. So yes, to me, that is a horrible infraction of someone's rights, liberties, and freedoms, is to take away the freedom of choice of how they sexually express themselves by saying who they want to have sex with and who they do not want to. Sex should always be consensual. Always. Always, without exception. There is no exception to that rule. Sex should always and only be consensual. Period. That's really how I feel. So yes, there is anger in there, but I'm withdrawing my anger so that I can focus on another issue that is a bigger issue that is spreading across the Western nation, and that is the ideology of two very extreme political philosophies, the far left and the far right. And if you think I'm a bad guy for saying that, I'm very sorry. But I'm just trying to analyze them and see what I can make of them. Maybe there's an opportunity to convince me and persuade me. I particularly like to think of myself as a liberal. That is how I've always subscribed myself. That is how I've always thought of myself. Well, unless you count when I was a teenager, I subscribed myself. I kind of got into utopian anarchy for a little while, but I grew up and realized that was unattainable. It's a utopian pipe dream. And I had to say goodbye to it and realized that some structure is needed because people without structure rape, murder, and molest and steal from you. So I'll leave you with that. Like, share, subscribe, comment, hit the bell button on any channel you're subscribed to. With that, I'm out.